On the back wall of a temple in southern Egypt, carved into stone the size of a billboard, there is a woman standing behind a young boy. Tourists photograph it every day without understanding what they're looking at, because that carving is a death sentence. The woman is Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, and the boy in front of her is the reason she had to die, the reason her son was hunted down at 17, and the reason her tomb, the most famous tomb of the ancient world, was made to disappear so completely that we've spent 2,000 years failing to find it. The boy's name was Caesarion, Little Caesar, the only biological son of Julius Caesar. And when Rome came for Egypt, one advisor whispered a single sentence into the new emperor's ear. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. Within days, the boy was dead. Within weeks, Cleopatra was dead. And within a generation, the location of her grave had been wiped from the record. Not lost, erased. There's a difference. And that difference is what this entire investigation is about. Because here's what almost nobody tells you. We know exactly how Cleopatra died. Hour by hour. We have the account of her own physician, a man named Olympus, who was in the palace during her final days, and whose testimony survived. We know what she ate. We know who was with her. We know the last words spoken in that room. What we don't know is where they put her body. And the hieroglyphs she left behind, carved into temple walls and pressed into a plate of blue glass buried in the desert, may finally answer that question. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to reconstruct her final hours from the primary sources, decode 3 inscriptions that scholars ignored for centuries, and follow a tunnel carved through more than a kilometer of solid rock to a discovery announced just months ago, 40 feet beneath the Mediterranean Sea. A discovery that suggests Cleopatra did something in her last days that no one gave her credit for. She didn't just die on her own terms. She may have outsmarted Rome one final time, from inside her own coffin. Start with the hours themselves, because the ancient record here is not vague myth. It reads like a police file. August 30 BCE, Alexandria has fallen. Octavian, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar and the future emperor Augustus, has marched into the city almost unopposed. Mark Antony, Cleopatra's husband and Rome's fallen general, has already botched his own suicide. Told falsely that Cleopatra was dead, he drove a sword into his stomach, then learned she was alive, barricaded inside her own mausoleum near the Temple of Isis. The dying man was carried to the tomb. The doors were already sealed, so Cleopatra and her 2 attendants lowered ropes from an upper window and hauled him up the outside wall, a bleeding, dying man, dragged upward by 3 women. Plutarch, who spoke to sources going back to that physician, wrote that nothing more heartbreaking was ever witnessed. Antony died in her arms, inside the tomb they were supposed to share. For the next 9 days, Cleopatra was a prisoner in her own palace. And this is where the record gets chilling, because everything she did in those 9 days looks, in hindsight, like preparation. She was allowed to oversee Antony's burial. She visited his grave. She poured offerings. She was also, quietly, testing poisons on condemned prisoners, watching which deaths were fast, which were slow, which were painful, which were peaceful. The historians recorded this. She was doing research. Octavian's plan for her was no secret. She would be shipped to Rome and dragged through the streets in chains during his triumph, a trophy queen for the crowds to spit at. Her sister Arsinoe had been paraded exactly that way years earlier. Cleopatra had watched it happen. She knew the script. And there's one more scene from those 9 days that historians recorded. A scene that tells you everything about the game being played. Octavian himself came to visit her. He found her lying on a simple bed, grieving, her arms scratched from mourning. She spoke to him softly, offered him lists of her treasures, played the broken woman. One of her stewards interrupted to accuse her of hiding valuables from the list, and she flew at the man in a rage, because a queen hiding treasure is a queen planning to live. Octavian left the room smiling, convinced she wanted to survive. He believed he had read her. He was the most calculating politician of his age, and a 39-year-old woman under armed guard played him like an instrument. The moment his guard relaxed, she moved. On the last morning, she asked permission to visit Antony's tomb one final time. She bathed, she dressed in her royal robes, she ordered a meal, and then a man arrived from the countryside carrying a basket of figs. The guards at the door inspected it, found nothing but fruit, and waved it through. Hours later, Octavian received a sealed letter from Cleopatra requesting one thing: to be buried beside Antony. He understood instantly what it meant and sent men running to the palace. They found the guards standing at the door, aware of nothing. Inside, Cleopatra lay dead on a golden couch, dressed as pharaoh, the royal diadem on her brow. Her attendant, Eros, was dying at her feet. The second attendant, Charmian, barely standing, was adjusting the crown on her dead queen's head. One of the soldiers snapped at her in fury, asking if this was well done. Charmian answered that it was very well done and fitting for the descendant of so many kings. Then she fell. The famous story says an Egyptian cobra, smuggled in among the figs, delivered the fatal bite. But here's the detail they don't put in the movies. No snake was ever found in that room. The soldiers searched. Nothing. Plutarch admits the truth openly, that nobody actually knew how she did it. Some said 2 faint punctures on her arm. Others said a hidden hollow hairpin filled with poison. Modern toxicologists have pointed out that a cobra bite is a slow, ugly, unreliable death, and that a queen who spent 9 days scientifically testing poisons would never have chosen it. A German historian, Christoph Schaefer, analyzed the ancient descriptions of her death and concluded the symptoms match a drug cocktail of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium. Painless, fast, certain. The cobra, the sacred uraeus serpent that rears up on the crown of every pharaoh, may have been something else entirely, not the murder weapon. The message. In hieroglyphic royal iconography, the cobra on the brow is the mark of legitimate divine kingship. Cleopatra didn't just die. She published her death in the symbolic language of the pharaohs, telling Egypt she died a god, not a Roman prisoner. She wasn't escaping. She was outmaneuvering, and Octavian knew it, because what he did next is the real subject of this story. He granted her final request. Plutarch records that Cleopatra was buried with Antony in royal splendor, in a magnificent tomb, which means the tomb existed, it was known, it was public. Roman officials attended the burial, and then, within a few generations, every trace of its location vanished from the written record. No pilgrim accounts, no later historian saying he visited it. The most famous woman in the ancient world, buried in a known monument in the most documented city of the Mediterranean, and the address simply evaporates. Tombs of far lesser figures survived in the record for centuries. Hers didn't. That's not how memory works. That's how erasure works. Rome had a formal practice for it, a legal act of deleting a person from history. Statues smashed, names chiseled out of stone. Octavian ordered Cleopatra's images torn down across the empire. And the only reason any survived at all is that a wealthy Egyptian friend of hers named Archibius paid Octavian 2,000 talents, an astronomical fortune, to spare the statues in Egypt. Think about that transaction. Her memory was so dangerous it had a price tag. Today, out of a reign of 21 years, fewer than 10 confirmed statues of Cleopatra exist on Earth. Rome spent decades rewriting her as a foreign seductress who corrupted good Roman men, and that propaganda worked so well, we still repeat it. But you can't chisel a name out of an entire country. And in Egypt, in stone, in hieroglyphs, pieces of the real record survived. 3 of them, 3 inscriptions, form a trail, and the trail leads somewhere no one expected. The first inscription is the one you can still walk up and touch, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, on the west bank of the Nile. On the rear exterior wall, Cleopatra had herself carved at colossal scale in the full regalia of an Egyptian queen, presenting offerings to the gods. And in front of her, carved even larger, as a grown pharaoh, is Caesarion, her son, Caesar's son. This is the largest surviving image of Cleopatra anywhere in the world, and for centuries, scholars treated it as routine temple decoration, standard Ptolemaic propaganda. But look at what the hieroglyphs actually say. The cartouches name the boy as Ptolemy Caesar, beloved of Ptah and Ra. They give him the full five-fold royal titulary of a pharaoh of Egypt. This wall is not decoration, it's a legal document in stone. A public, permanent, divine declaration that the son of Julius Caesar was the living king of Egypt. Now put yourself in Octavian's position. His entire claim to Rome rested on being Caesar's heir. He was adopted. Caesarion was blood. Every hieroglyph on that wall was a direct challenge to his legitimacy, carved 40 feet tall where every Egyptian could see it. When Alexandria fell, Cleopatra sent the 17-year-old boy fleeing south toward the Red Sea with a treasure escort, aiming for India, out of Rome's reach. Octavian's agents caught up with him. They lured him back with a promise of mercy. Then they executed him. The last pharaoh of Egypt by blood, strangled on the road home, on the advice of a philosopher who reworked a line of Homer into that one lethal sentence about too many Caesars. And here's the detail that proves how dangerous that wall was. Across Egypt, later hands went after monuments like it. Cartouches of the Ptolemies were chiseled hollow. Faces of the dynasty hacked off temple walls. Royal names gouged out of the stone, so the gods themselves would forget them. To erase a name in hieroglyphs was not vandalism in the Egyptian mind. It was a second death, the annihilation of the soul. Dendera survived largely because it was far to the south, days from the Roman administration in Alexandria, guarded by a priesthood that had no intention of murdering their goddess twice. The Dendera wall tells you the motive for everything that followed. Cleopatra's tomb could never be allowed to become what it would inevitably become: a shrine to a rival dynasty, a rallying point, a pilgrimage site for a country that worshipped her as the living incarnation of the goddess Isis. Her body wasn't just a corpse, it was a political weapon. And that brings us to the second inscription, because Cleopatra understood all of this while she was still alive. Which raises a question that took 2,000 years and one very stubborn outsider to ask properly. If you were her and you knew Rome would need your tomb to disappear, would you really let them decide where to put you? For 20 centuries, everyone assumed the answer was yes. The mainstream position, held by nearly every Egyptologist, is that Cleopatra was buried in her mausoleum in the royal quarter of Alexandria, the same building where Antony died in her arms, and that the tomb was destroyed or drowned. And there's a real basis for that. In the year 365, a massive earthquake and tsunami hit Alexandria, killed thousands, and dropped the entire royal quarter into the harbor. Since 1992, the underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio has been mapping that sunken city, and his teams have found palaces, sphinxes, colossal statues, even a temple of Isis near the palace district, with coins bearing Cleopatra's image among the ruins. The infrastructure of her world is genuinely down there, under 20 feet of harbor water. But that explanation has a problem. Gaudio has been mapping and excavating that seabed for over 30 years with the best technology in marine archaeology. He found the temples, he found the port, he found her father's coins. He never found a tomb, no sarcophagus, no burial chamber, no inscription marking the mausoleum of the most famous couple in the ancient world. After 3 decades, the sunken royal quarter has given up its palaces, but not its queen. And there's a second problem with the Alexandria theory that people rarely say out loud. If the tomb stood in the royal quarter, then for almost 400 years, from her death until the tsunami of 365, it was right there, above water, in the middle of the busiest city in the eastern Mediterranean. Roman emperors visited Alexandria. Tourists of the ancient world wrote about its wonders, its lighthouse, its library, the tomb of Alexander the Great. Not one of them describes visiting the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra, the most romantic grave in history, in the most visited city on earth. And the guidebooks of antiquity are silent. Either it wasn't worth mentioning, which is absurd, or by then there was nothing left to visit. And one researcher looked at that 30-year silence and drew a conclusion that made the entire field roll its eyes. Maybe the tomb isn't there because it was never there. Maybe the burial the Romans attended was not the burial that mattered. Her name is Kathleen Martinez, and she is not an Egyptologist. She's a criminal defense lawyer from the Dominican Republic. 2 decades ago, she approached Cleopatra's death the way you'd approach a case file, and she fixed on one line in Plutarch that everyone else read past. The tomb she was building stood near a temple of Isis. Then, Martinez applied a lawyer's logic. Cleopatra had spent her whole reign presenting herself as the new Isis, the living embodiment of the goddess. She had watched Rome parade her sister in chains. She had 9 days under guard, with loyal priests still moving freely through the country to arrange her true resting place. If the queen, who identified as Isis, wanted her body to vanish from Roman reach, she would go to Isis. Martinez drew a radius around Alexandria, every temple a funeral party could reach within a day, and eliminated them one by one. Too small, wrong god, wrong period. Until she was left staring at a wrecked, wind-blasted ruin on a ridge 30 miles west of Alexandria, squeezed between the Mediterranean and an ancient lake. Taposiris Magna. The name means the great tomb of Osiris, the god of the dead, the divine husband of Isis. In the mythology, Isis gathered the body of her murdered husband and hid it from his enemy so it could never be desecrated. Now read that sentence again and replace Isis with Cleopatra and the enemy with Rome. The site wasn't just convenient. It was the myth itself in geography. There was only one problem. The temple was anonymous. In 200 years of archaeology, no one had ever found a single inscription saying who built it or which god it served. It was the only major temple in Egypt with no identity. Every expert told Martinez she was wasting her time on an empty fort. In 2005, she got her permit anyway. And within months, her team pulled a small plate of blue glass out of the foundations. On it, written in Greek and in hieroglyphs, was the dedication that 2 centuries of professionals had failed to find. The temple belonged to Isis, and the foundation records tied its construction directly to Cleopatra's own dynasty, her ancestors, the Ptolemies. The anonymous ruin had a name, and the name pointed straight at her family and her goddess. That plate of glass is the second inscription. If you're the kind of person who needs to know what was buried under that temple, hit subscribe, because this channel digs into erased history and sealed tombs every single week. And what comes next at this site is the part nobody saw coming. Because once the temple had a name, it started confessing. Martinez's team found hundreds of bronze coins in and around the sanctuary, and stamped on them, again and again, was Cleopatra's face and Cleopatra's name. Not her dynasty in general, her. In one recent season alone, excavators working beneath the temple's southern wall recovered 337 more coins, many carrying her portrait, along with ritual vessels, a bronze ring dedicated to the goddess Hathor, and a scarab amulet inscribed with the phrase, "The justice of Ra has shone." They found a white marble statue of a woman wearing a royal diadem, which Martinez believes may be only the 8th statue of Cleopatra known to exist. One more survivor of Octavian's purge. Outside the walls, they uncovered an entire necropolis, 21 catacombs holding more than 1,000 burials, and the bodies were not arranged randomly. Rows of the dead were interred facing the temple, the posture reserved for those buried in the orbit of royalty. Some of the mummies had been wrapped in gold leaf. 2 were found with thin tongues of hammered gold placed in their mouths. a ritual meant to let the dead speak the passwords of the underworld. Ordinary villagers do not get golden tongues. Somebody of enormous importance was in that ground, and an entire community of the dead had been oriented toward them for centuries. For years, Martinez was mocked for saying it out loud. Then, in 2022, her workers broke through into something that shut a lot of people up. 13 meters beneath the temple, carved dead straight through solid bedrock, was a tunnel. Not a drain, not a crypt. A tunnel over 1,300 meters long, more than 4,000 feet, tall enough to walk through, engineered with a precision that archaeologists compared to the legendary tunnel of Eupalinos in Greece. One of the engineering wonders of the classical world. Inside it, sealed in the dark, were ceramic jars and pottery dating to the exact window of Cleopatra's reign. And the tunnel was not wandering. It ran with intent, out from under the temple of Isis, under the ridge, heading in one unmistakable direction, toward the sea. Think about the labor involved. Crews cutting by lamplight through more than a kilometer of living rock, in secret, beneath a temple, keeping the line straight, without lasers, without surveys, without error. Nobody commissions that for convenience. You build something like that because what moves through it must never be seen. Sections of it were already drowned, flooded with salt water, because the coastline of Egypt is not where it was 2,000 years ago. Whatever this passage once connected to, the Mediterranean had swallowed it. A hidden corridor, built at colossal expense, running from a temple of Isis to open water. That is the third inscription in this story, written not in ink, but in bedrock. And it raised a question with only one way to answer it. What was waiting at the other end? To find out, Martinez needed someone who could read the seafloor. So, in 2024, she recruited the one man on Earth most famous for finding what the ocean hides, Bob Ballard, the oceanographer who discovered the wreck of the Titanic. Ballard's team ran sonar sweeps off the coast in line with the tunnel's heading, and the scans lit up with geometry. Straight lines, right angles, rows. Divers went down 40 feet, fanned away the sand, and their lights fell on something that had not seen the sun in a very long time. Columns. Rows of towering man-made structures rising more than 6 meters off the seabed. Beneath the silt, a polished stone floor, cemented blocks, stone anchors, storage jars from the Ptolemaic era scattered across the bottom. In September 2025, the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities made it official. This was a port, a substantial, engineered harbor, active during the time of Cleopatra, sitting directly offshore from Taposiris Magna and aligned with the tunnel under the temple. Understand what that alignment means. There was no record of any harbor here. No ancient author mentions it. Martinez had predicted it anyway, partly from a single inscription inside the temple, a carved note from a pilgrim thanking Isis and Osiris for surviving a storm at sea. Sailors don't thank the gods at a landlocked shrine. The temple had a maritime door, and the door had been deliberately connected to the sanctuary by a hidden underground passage. A funeral party could enter the temple of Isis in full view, descend, move more than a kilometer underground, and emerge at the water unseen by any watcher on land. If you wanted to make a body vanish in 30 BCE, you could not design a better machine for it. Martinez's reconstruction is simple and cold. The public burial in Alexandria satisfied Rome. Then, or instead, the queen's body traveled west, into the temple of her goddess, down into the rock, through the tunnel, and out to a place Rome would never think to look, because Rome didn't know the door existed. She would have done anything, Martinez has said, to keep her body out of Roman hands. And in the year 365, when the great earthquake and tsunami tore the coast apart and drowned the port, the sea sealed the secret better than any priesthood ever could. Now, does any of this prove Cleopatra is lying beneath Taposiris Magna or somewhere off its shore? Honestly, no. Not yet. And you deserve to hear the case against it, because it's serious. The majority of Egyptologists still believe the simplest reading, that she was buried in her Alexandrian mausoleum, exactly as Plutarch describes, and that the tomb was ruined, quarried away, or drowned with the rest of the royal quarter. Historians like Jane Draycott point out that Romans generally treated the bodies of defeated enemies with formal respect, and that Cleopatra may never have needed an escape plan for her own corpse. Temples of Isis, skeptics note, were everywhere, so Plutarch's clue is weaker than it sounds. 20 years of digging at Taposiris Magna have produced coins, statues, elite burials, and extraordinary engineering, but no royal sarcophagus, no inscription naming her grave, no body. The tunnel could have served the port as infrastructure, moving goods and water, rather than a dead queen. Every individual find has a mundane possible explanation. But here's what survives even the harshest skepticism. The foundation plate is real, and it ended 2 centuries of mystery about the temple's god. The coins, with her face, are real. The golden-tongued dead facing the sanctuary are real. The 1,300-meter tunnel is real, and it is dated to her lifetime. The sunken port is real, confirmed by the Egyptian state, and no ancient source ever recorded its existence, which means the ancient world kept at least one secret about this site for 2,000 years. Strip away every speculation, and you are still left with a temple of Isis, tied to Cleopatra's bloodline, stamped with her face, wired with hidden passages to a harbor that history forgot. The question is no longer whether Taposiris Magna was hiding something. It was. The question is whether the thing it was hiding is her. And that's why this search matters more than one queen's bones. If Martinez is right, then the most famous death scene in ancient history was also the greatest disappearing act ever performed. It would mean Cleopatra spent her final 9 days under Roman guard, quietly executing a plan that defeated an empire's intelligence, its occupation army, and its emperor, using nothing but faith, geometry, and stone. It would mean the Roman erasure of her memory failed at the one thing it wanted most: control of her body. And it would mean our history is missing a chapter written by the woman herself, in the last language Rome couldn't read. Hieroglyphs on a temple wall naming her son a king. A glass plate naming her goddess. A tunnel naming her destination. She wasn't hiding from history. She was waiting for someone who could read her. The dig at Taposiris Magna continues every season. The flooded sections of the tunnel have never been fully explored. The deepest chambers beneath the temple remain unexcavated, and the sunken port has only begun to give up its floor plan. Somewhere out there, beneath the sand, or beneath 40 feet of green Mediterranean water, the last pharaoh of Egypt may still be lying beside the man she pulled up a tomb wall with her own hands, exactly where she planned to be, in the one grave Rome could never parade. Still hidden, still sealed, still winning. If erased history like this is your thing, watch the next investigation on screen right now.